I think everybody is getting the debate on Israel wrong. AIPAC is not this all-powerful organization that controls politicians with payouts and campaign funds. But this doesn't mean that something fishy isn't going on here. Buckle up, because I'm about to open a massive can of worms here, and the rabbit hole goes further than you can imagine. First, I'd like to clarify that no opinions or reporting in this story are reflections of opinions on the Jewish people or Jewish beliefs. This report is directly analyzing actions of the Israeli government independent of religious affiliation. At no point will I be indulging in conspiracy theories regarding Jewish space lasers or anti-Semitic attacks on Jewish people. I am interested in facts, and if the facts show that a person did something despicable, I don't care what their race or religion is. That is a despicable person. The United States gives more military aid to Israel than any other country in the world except Ukraine, which is currently at war with a global superpower. This is the US taxpayer paying $3.6 billion to the Israeli military every year. This is not counting the supplemental shipments of weapons and munitions valued at $18 to $24 billion when Israel invaded Gaza. If you break down per capita yearly aid, Israel is on another planet compared to any other country, including wartime Ukraine. So, why does the US give so much money to Israel? The assumption would be that there is some kind of return here, or it's like Taiwan, where they make most of the world's microchips. Protecting them is vitally important to national security. So, does Israel produce some strategic resource, or does the US get some kind of return? When I started researching this story, this was the primary answer I was looking for. I expected it to be related to having a foothold in the Middle East, which is partly true, but I was not ready for the full rationale. They do provide a so-called unsinkable aircraft carrier that gives the US a place to stage military operations in the Middle East, but they also provide the US with intelligence that has proven to be useful in preventing some terrorist attacks. Definitely sounds like it could be worth the money, but Israel isn't exactly trustworthy when it comes to their intelligence agencies. There is a long history of Israel actively spying on the United States, and there have been credible reports of Israel gathering intelligence on American soil from Congress and the executive branch. In 1985, Jonathan Pollard was working for the Navy as a civilian intelligence analyst. He was discovered to have passed an enormous volume of classified materials to Israel. This was in exchange for $2,500 a month from the Israeli government. Israel initially denied that he was working for them, claiming Pollard was working for a rogue faction. In 1998, he was granted Israeli citizenship and was welcomed into Israel by Benjamin Netanyahu. During the summer of 1954, Israeli military intelligence recruited Egyptians to plant firebombs in Egyptian, British, and American civilian targets within Egypt. The bombs were timed to detonate after hours and would serve as a false flag operation blamed on the Muslim Brotherhood. The intention was to sow instability and prevent British withdrawal from the Suez Canal, as the US and UK relations with Egypt were warming. The Egyptian recruits were caught, and Israel was implicated as the organizers. Israel denied involvement for 51 years until 2005, when President Moshe Katsav publicly honored the surviving recruits. In 2021, the U.S. Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security added the Israeli firm NSO Group to its entity list for supplying spyware used against U.S. officials, journalists, and activists. The NSO's exports were licensed by the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Later that year, the Washington Post reported that NSO's software Pegasus had been used to hack the iPhones of U.S. government personnel. Apple would sue NSO, calling it a state-sponsored actor. The identity of the specific government customer responsible was never publicly confirmed. In 2019, Politico reported that FBI forensic analysis had concluded that Israel planted Stingray self-sight simulators, or IMSI catchers, near the White House and other sensitive locations in Washington. This was with the express intent to spy on President Trump and his aides. The report was based on information from 3 former senior U.S. officials that remain anonymous. The Israeli and U.S. governments publicly denied that this occurred. U.S. counterintelligence assessments have repeatedly ranked Israel as among the aggressive collectors operating against the United States among allied nations. In 2014, Newsweek reported that classified congressional briefings described Israel's espionage in the United States as unrivaled and unseemly. Staffers reported that the briefing was sobering, alarming, and even terrifying. Israel angrily denied the characterization, with Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman calling it malicious. One anonymous Israeli official told reporters that the story carried a whiff of anti-Semitism. This follows a pattern of shielding accusations of damning behavior behind claims of anti-Semitism. Despite the denials, as recent as June of this year, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency raised the counterintelligence threat assessment of Israel from high to critical, the highest classification. This is based on New York Times and NBC reporting that also reported Israel as the highest threat level of any allied country and higher than many adversarial countries. One senior official described Israel's collection efforts as unhinged concerning their surveillance of senior U.S. officials. This includes Pentagon officials Eldridge Colby and Michael Domino, with the intent to learn about the Trump administration's internal Middle East deliberations. Israel once again denied the claims, but the Pentagon refused to comment. It's not just spying either. Israel has been responsible for the deaths of 50 American citizens since they became a country in 1948. This excludes American volunteers within the IDF, but that's 50 human beings that Israel has killed without consequence from the American government. In fact, we have given them more money over time. For reference, if we exclude proxy wars and volunteers in the Ukrainian military, the USSR and Russia since 1948 directly killed a confirmed 50 to 55 American citizens. At most 100 if you include the unclear or unconfirmed ones. Israel has killed as many Americans since 1948 as Russia has in the same time period. The worst part is, the Russians killed military members. All but 2 were military, with those 2 civilian deaths coming in the Ukraine war. Only 34 of the 50 Americans that Israel has killed were military, all of which came from what Israel claims was a misidentification of an American Navy ship in 1967. They torpedoed the ship and killed 34 Americans. High-ranking military personnel from that time claimed it was not an accident. That means that Israel has killed 16 American civilians, all of which are in the last 23 years. I know I've given you a lot of numbers, but I don't want you to lose grasp of the fact that these are people. People with families and children. People who, as American citizens, should get the protection of their government with some kind of recourse. But their government has abandoned them. Here is a list of Americans killed by the Israeli military, or the IDF. Rachel Corrie, crushed to death by an IDF armored bulldozer while protesting a home demolition in Rafah, Gaza in 2003. No one held criminally responsible. Furkan Dogan, shot 5 times, including 4 times in the head at close range by Israeli naval commandos during the raid of the Mavi Marmara flotilla in 2010. No one held criminally responsible. Orwa Hamad, shot in the head by Israeli soldiers in the West Bank village of Silwad in 2014. No one held criminally responsible. Mahmoud Shalan, shot by Israeli soldiers at the West Bank checkpoint near Ramallah in 2016. No one held criminally responsible. Omar Assad died after being detained, bound, blindfolded, gagged, and left by IDF soldiers in the West Bank in 2022. No one held criminally responsible. Shireen Abu Akleh, shot in the head by Israeli forces while reporting in a marked press vest during a raid in Jenin in 2022. No one held criminally responsible. Tawfiq Abdel-Jabbar, shot and killed by an Israeli settler and IDF soldiers who both fired on his vehicle in the West Bank in 2024. No one held criminally responsible. Mohammed Kador, fatally shot from a distance while sitting in a car in the hills near Bidu in the West Bank in 2024. No one held criminally responsible. Aysenur Ezgi Egi, shot in the head by an Israeli soldier during a protest against settlement expansion in the West Bank in 2024. No one held criminally responsible. Amer Rabi, shot multiple times and killed by Israeli soldiers near Termis Aya in the West Bank in 2025. No one held criminally responsible. Jacob Flickinger, killed in an Israeli airstrike on the World Central Kitchen aid convoy in Gaza in 2024. No one held criminally responsible. Kamel Ahmad Jawad, killed in an Israeli airstrike in his hometown in southern Lebanon in 2024. No one held criminally responsible. Americans killed by Israeli settlers. Saifullah Musalet, beaten to death by Israeli settlers while visiting family in Sinjil, West Bank in 2025. No one held criminally responsible. Kamis Ayad died of smoke inhalation during an Israeli settler arson attack in the West Bank in 2025. No one held criminally responsible. Nasrallah Abu Siam, fatally shot by Israeli settlers, with soldiers reportedly present during a raid on the town of Mukmas in the West Bank in 2026. No one held criminally responsible. I am left thinking of the righteous fury that would be brought upon any other country that dared to kill this many American citizens. There would be no peace until all the opposition could see was a sky of fire and smoke blotting out the sun. So why, after all of this, has the United States government continued to send funds to the Israeli military? From my research, I found chiefly 3 reasons for continued support from the United States. Reason 1. Perhaps the simplest, straightforward cause of continued support has been the general approval of Israel from American voters. Until very recently, polling showed Israel as more favorable compared to Palestinians. The strong support has been propped up by a large portion of Republican voters who support Israel based on evangelical values. Lobbying groups like Christians United for Israel have over 11 million members currently, which has grown substantially in recent years. This group has a larger population than Jewish people currently living in America. Evangelical support is still strong for Israel as of now, but cracks are showing with Republican support of Israel falling 10 points. Overall support for Israel has reversed for the first time since Gallup started polling the subject more than 2 decades ago. 41% of Americans now sympathize more with Palestinians than Israel, with 36% holding the opposite opinion. In March of 2026, a poll found that 60% of Americans now hold very or somewhat unfavorable views of Israel, up 7 points in just 1 year and 20 points since 2022. The good thing about this drastic change is that it gives us a great test to see if this was, in fact, the driving force of support. Previously, with support high among the public, the vote with the least friction for members of Congress would be the pro-Israel one. Now, voting for pro-Israel legislation can come with strong backlash from voters, especially for a Democrat. If congressional votes start not going Israel's way, that would indicate that voter support is the primary driving factor, especially if the younger generation of evangelicals who support Israel much less on average push their representatives to start voting against Israel. Reason number 2. From its inception, the United States has provided monetary support to Israel as a strategic foothold in the Middle East. Historically, this was to counterbalance Soviet-aligned Egypt in the region. If that was the root cause, then financial support would have fallen after the fall of the Soviet Union. But it did not. So, if the fight against communism wasn't the root cause of military funding, then what is? The military-industrial complex may be playing a part in the lobbying for Israel funding. As with almost all foreign military aid given out by the United States, money sent to Israel comes with a caveat. That money has to be spent in the United States. Israel does have a deal where only about 75% of the money needs to be spent in the US, but that comes to an end in 2028 and will return to 100% spending in the US. This spending limitation means that foreign aid given to countries like Israel and Ukraine serves as a roundabout stimulus to the military-industrial complex. All of those tax dollars are going straight to the big military contractors like Raytheon, RTX, and Lockheed Martin. This creates an incentive for those companies to lobby Congress to keep sending that money overseas. This is especially suspect since these companies and AIPAC, the US-based pro-Israel lobbying group, tend to support the same candidates. These candidates are the ones that sit on the Armed Services and Appropriations Committee, who shape the legislation that sends Israel money. However, given that the money sent to Israel only makes up about 0.4% of the US military budget, it might be too little of a dollar amount for the contractors to go out of their way to specifically support Israel. It is more likely that the interests align and the lobbying done by the contractors causes a more indirect support of Israel. If the military contractors were the driving support of Israel, they would be among the loudest in support of aid, but they are mostly quiet on this matter compared to the ideological groups AIPAC and the Christians United for Israel. Reason number 3. AIPAC, or the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has become one of the boogeymen for anti-Israel advocates due to its large expenditures on elections in the United States. It can often be conflated that AIPAC spending is money from the Israeli government, but this is not the case. AIPAC is an American organization with American members and donors as required by law. I was unable to find any credible evidence showing direct Israeli spending on any US election. However, AIPAC still manages to raise enormous amounts of money from large donors. In the 2023 to 2024 election cycle, they spent over $90 million for and against candidates through the AIPAC, PAC, and the Super PAC United Democracy Project, or UDP. As a reference, the American military contractors only spend $35 million in that same cycle. Military contractors, however, do spend a much larger amount on lobbying current members of Congress. With the amount of expenditure that AIPAC puts into elections, it's no wonder that politicians tend to vote in Israel's favor. This isn't even to say that AIPAC gets representatives elected directly either. AIPAC has shown that they don't need to spend the money to elect new representatives as long as they can show the rest of the sitting members of Congress that they can be ousted if AIPAC chooses. AIPAC demonstrated this 3 times recently with the ousting of Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, and Thomas Massie, all of whom were staunchly anti-Israel. The ousting of Massie was the most expensive House primary in history, with $32.6 million spent on ads. AIPAC has shown cracks with losses before, but if their election expenditures put pressure on sitting congresspeople to vote in favor of Israeli interests, then AIPAC could prove to be one of the most powerful political organizations in the country. One of the most damning and disturbing facts I found while researching this story was that of the Israeli field trips for freshman representatives. AIPAC has a subsidiary charity organization called American Israel Education Foundation, or the AIEF. This charitable foundation funds field trips for almost all freshman congresspeople, where they are shown around the country and provided with a biased Israel-centric view of the region. These trips are so frequent and enduring that it is considered a rite of passage for freshman congresspeople. The AIEF exists to fund these trips, as AIPAC, as a lobbying group, cannot directly fund foreign trips for sitting government officials. Now, Israel is not the only country that holds these kinds of field trips, but they are by far the most common, having held 129 field trips in 2019 alone. Unlike the other possible reasons for continued support of Israel, this one can be hard to track going forward. The best evidence that election spending isn't driving this support comes from the 60 years before 2021, where AIPAC was purely a lobbying organization with no election spending. This period saw massive success for the organization, with large majorities of both houses of Congress in support of pro-Israel policies. However, the very existence of the PAC and Super PAC formed by AIPAC is proof that the old strategy of lobbying was no longer sufficient to promote pro-Israel priorities. With their creation, the very intent was to put pressure on politicians to give more support to Israel, since new freshmen like the Squad of Progressive Democrats were elected with strong anti-Israel attitudes. This new focus on elections is a direct response to representatives and the shifting polling showing a massive drop in support for Israel. The new strategy has shown signs of backfiring recently, as many candidates have outright refused to take money from AIPAC, as it is seen by many constituents as manipulative and shady. If you had asked me a few years ago which of the three reasons I thought was the true cause, I would have probably said that, like most things in life, it's complicated. Some combination of the reasons given was probably the cause, but the current swing in political opinion has given us a great opportunity for the first time in decades to really strip down the pro-Israel support in Congress and see what lies underneath. Baseline public support of Israel is no longer there, so if we see congressional support waver, it may be a sign that Congress was following their voters after all. If support continues, it reinforces the idea that either military contractor spending, pro-Israel lobbying, or some combination are the root cause for the continued support. This is already starting, with the vote on July 15th to cut off support to Israel getting 103 votes from Democrats and 1 from Republicans. There will be future votes on this subject, so keep a close eye on those. There is no grand conspiracy here. No Jewish space lasers, no secret cabal, no puppet strings. What is happening is a system of individually legal, individually defensible mechanisms that have enabled continued killing of American citizens with no accountability, and enabled what human rights organizations have called a genocide in Gaza. This system was not our choice. No votes were cast, no ballots counted, no voices heard. So I'll ask again, where is the righteous fury? Where are the representatives of the US government who have a sworn duty to protect their citizens? Are they on a field trip to Israel? I'll tell you, the fury is buried under an alliance that's simultaneously a strategic asset, a revenue stream for defense contractors, and the best organized lobbying operation in the country. Each of those, individually, and even more so collectively, is enough to make representatives bury their heads in the sand. The fact that I can sit here and make a reasonable argument that a foreign country's interests are outweighing American ones in our own houses of Congress is a condemnation on the entire American political system. The same system that has turned a blind eye to the 16 American men and women who were killed by our ally, with no one held criminally responsible.